The US Department of Justice, in other words, they guided American prosecutors, participated in my case, came to Brazil to meet with the Brazilian Public Prosecutor's Office. The judge and the prosecutors went to the United States to discuss my conviction with the American prosecutors. We have recorded testimony of American prosecutors celebrating my arrest. The only explanation I can find for this, Eric, is that Brazil was becoming a very important international player. We were fighting for the UN Security Council to have more countries. We were fighting, we built a very strong bloc in South America. We were building the BRIC, Brazil, China, India, South Africa, and Russia. We were creating a multilateral organization. In other words, we even considered creating a currency, for commercial transactions, so we wouldn't have to depend on the dollar. We were seeing, for example, Brazil maintaining an extraordinary relationship with China. China became Brazil's #1 trading partner. Just so you have an idea, in my first year as president, the trade flow between Brazil and China was only $6 billion. When I left in 2010, it was already $76 billion. In other words, the commercial relationship between Brazil and China grew 16 times during my term. And China was an extremely important country in its relationship with Brazil, and I think that bothered the Americans. It bothered them because the Americans do not accept under any circumstances that any country in Latin America should have a leading role. They believe that the countries of Latin America must all remain subordinate to the guidance of the US State Department. And at the same time, China was making a lot of investments in South America and Latin America. China had a very strong partnership with Brazil, with Argentina, with Venezuela, with Ecuador, in other words. And this bothered the Americans, just as Brazil's entry into the African continent bothers them. And just as China's entry into the African continent bothers them. In other words, the United States is actually afraid of losing its primacy as the world's sheriff. In fact, it doesn't want any competitors, not in the economic sphere, not in the technological sphere, nor in the military sphere. And the concrete fact is that Brazil was growing. Brazil was becoming an international protagonist. China has been growing. And today, it's one of the countries with the highest GDP in the world. The Chinese economy has surpassed the American economy. And now they're worried about China's progress in terms of armaments, in terms of space exploration. So the Americans get uneasy because they have been used to, since World War I, to being the rulers of the world. So this is the explanation I have for what happened with the coup against President Dilma Rousseff, for what happened with my imprisonment and all the lies told against the PT. Is the only explanation I can find. That's it. The Americans have always interfered in Latin American politics. They were responsible for the coup in Brazil, responsible for the coup in Chile, for the coup in Uruguay, for the coup in Argentina, So yes, it's part of American political culture. And that's what I stood up against, because Brazil is a sovereign country. Brazil has the right to decide its own policies. Brazil has the right to decide its own economy. And Brazil has the right to determine its international relations, just as China also has that right. And that's precisely why we absolutely cannot accept the significant role that the United States consistently tries to impose upon all of humanity, perpetually wanting to be the world's sole sheriff and global enforcer.
This year, 2025, Brazil is the chair of BRICS. The position rotates every year among the different BRICS members. And in July, Lula hosted the BRICS summit in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro. And the summit was very successful. This was the first ever BRICS meeting featuring the 10 new partner countries. And Donald Trump was furious about the success of the BRICS summit, and he was very angry in particular at Lula. And while the BRICS summit was being held, Trump threatened to impose 10% tariffs on all BRICS countries. Soon after, Trump then threatened to impose 50% tariffs on Brazil in particular. Politico published an article citing Trump sources very close to the US president that reveal that Trump is absolutely furious about the expansion of BRICS and its challenging of the US dollar.